Hey there, everybody. My name is Kevin, and today we're going to be talking about powering online trust, specifically via machine learning. So a little bit more about me. I am the Trust and Safety Architect at Sift Science. Essentially what that means is I'm the in-house expert when it comes to anything and everything risk, fraud, trust and safety related. And so I've been at Sift Science for about just over a year, and I spent the last 12 or 13 years specifically in the risk and fraud space working for companies like Square, Facebook, and Google, helping them build out their organizations. My last role was actually at Facebook, who's been a lot in the news lately. I headed up the global spam team, and our mission was to basically stop the spread of spam, scams, and misinformation, aka fake news. A little bit more about Sift Science. We are a machine learning company, and we dedicate our time and resources to helping build digital trust between companies and consumers, specifically by fighting fraud and also improving the user experience. So today, let's talk a little bit about kind of the landscape of online trust, how that trust is broken, the impact of that, and finally, how to actually power trust at scale. So the first thing to talk about is the TSA. So everybody knows the drill, and when they go through airport security, they have to take off their shoes. Sometimes people have pre-TSA, but generally it's a pain in the ass. And why is that? So essentially the TSA doesn't trust you. You are guilty until proven innocent. And their entire business model is really geared towards security. When it comes to things like user experience, pretty low on the priority list. Unfortunately for a company like ours, that's not an option. Competition is fierce, margins are low, and consumers are ever more demanding, especially in this mobile, on-demand, instant gratification scenario or society. And so that leaves us in a tough spot. And something that I think Brandon, the prior speaker, gave was around user experience and friction. So on the left-hand side, we have our typical sign-up process, purchase process, enter in this crazy password that we're going to store for you that you probably won't remember. You're probably not going to use a password manager for it, and it's probably already hacked at some point. But this is the standard kind of draconian process right now where you have a ton of fields to fill out, and you're expected to know this information off the top of your head or pull out your wallet and put in all this other additional information. All this stuff is friction and really inhibiting things like conversion rate. And then on the right-hand side here, you have kind of the ubiquitous kind of one-click checkout scenario that Amazon has really brought up to the forefront, and many other companies across the board are trying to copy. Why is it that Amazon can offer this? Simply put, they trust you, or they know who you are, accurate enough where they want to give you that frictionless experience to get you on your way. If you want to purchase anything from TVs to diapers to gold rings, like you can get it via one click based on how much they trust you. So let's take a look at kind of the OTA or the travel space. So here are some screenshots for Airbnb. So they use Sift Science to kind of power their fraud engine to promote trust and also know or get a better idea at least on who they're dealing with. So they face things like fake accounts or stolen credit cards. So in this use case, let's say someone is booking a listing and they're using a stolen credit card. The host is probably going to get their money because they offered it up and somebody took it. The host is probably going to worry about more the fact that the stolen credit card was used on the platform and that person's now staying in their home. That's a whole other issue to deal with. Then you have things like promotions. And so folks on the marketing team hate this stuff because, one, they get a pretty large budget, which is great, but then from promotion abuse and affiliate abuse, it gets essentially hosed quite often. And so one experience that I had when I was at Google managing the Google Checkout product, which has since been branded the Google Pay, we had our marketing team spend several $1 million on acquiring new users. And the marketing team was thrilled about it. They got this big budget, want to acquire all these new users, and they had some good results until I went to them and said, hey, by the way, about 30% of your marketing revenue here to acquire new users is all being spent on this small subset of users. So essentially you are acquiring the same user over and over again. And so they're in a tough spot because 30% of their budget just got blown on this one subset. So for the marketing people out there, what would you do with 30% more revenue on your marketing budget? Next up is around fake listings. And so sometimes, let's say you're looking to book a place in San Francisco for a conference and you have a really great listing that's really, really reasonably priced. Maybe the host says, hey, let's take this offline. Let's go through PayPal or Venmo or Western Union or something. I'll give you a 10% discount. Airbnb is not going to know about it, and you're going to get a great deal. Let's make it happen. And finally, something that's come across more and more is around, especially for folks in the loyalty space, which I think is the next talk, is around securing those users, where this happens all the time, whether it's Delta, United Airlines, hotels. Like, loyalty points are a huge thing. Forget Bitcoin or Litecoin. Like, this is one of the first digital currencies out there, and people really, really like collecting them and using them. And it's a very sensitive thing, especially if their airline miles or hotel points get jacked. And usually what happens is the airline will make that customer whole again, because literally these are your most loyal customers, but that's still money at the end of the day. And so that's another issue that a lot of companies are facing, specifically when they have loyalty programs. So what does all this lead to? Essentially, it's an erosion of trust, where companies don't necessarily trust consumers, because whether they're stolen credit cards or it's spam, they don't quite know, like, is this a legit user? If someone books next day travel to SF, first class, that could be a big financial risk, and maybe they may be tempted to cancel that particular transaction. On the flip side, consumers may not trust companies. Is this a fake listing I'm clicking on? In Facebook's case, like, what are they doing with my data? And do I want to kind of give up this information in order to make this transaction happen? And so trust is really being eroded on both sides. But that transition doesn't necessarily look like this, where it's smooth, takes a lot of time, and relatively pleasant to look at. It's something more like this. It's more intense, more violent, and more sudden. So imagine if your Instagram account or Facebook account was hijacked, and that fraudster, that scammer basically took advantage of your account, spread all these kind of scams and misinformation and fake news all over with your friends. What would your engagement look like after you got your account back? My team at Facebook would make sure you get your account back. It would take some time. We'd do some scrubbing to make sure that most of the content gets cleaned up, but it's not always 100%. But what would it look like from an engagement rate in terms of how often would you want to get on that system again? And we definitely saw some differences where pre and post account takeover, your engagement rate would drop off. So let's say you used to post 5 times a week, but maybe now you're only posting twice a week, and the stuff that you are posting, it used to be original content where you're typing stuff in, but now maybe you're just resharing some news articles. And so that particular type of erosion can happen pretty darn quick. Even as a stock price example, like Facebook's their stock price dropped a ton, like within 48 hours after the whole Cambridge Analytica stuff came out. I think about $60 billion worth of kind of company valuation. So what does this erosion lead to? So for folks in the room that are familiar with chargebacks or disputes, that's definitely one area, but it doesn't stop there. Really, you talk about things like reduced engagement. The marketing team may be concerned about lifetime value of customers, customer acquisition cost. All these things play a part in that erosion process. And whether it's friction or whether it's additional friction or kind of just trusting these users and hoping for the best, dangerous things can happen as a result. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to money. In some way, shape, or form, that's really what it comes down to. And that's really where the CFO or the company is really gearing towards in terms of growth and profitability. So knowing how trust can be breached in kind of all these different areas that are kind of messed up or can be potholes for your business, what can you do to power trust online? First thing that I think a few other folks touched on, especially in the earlier sessions, was around data. Like, all the data. Having that information is power. And even in this previous session where we were talking about getting passive data, that is so key. Most of the companies that I talk with and work with, when we look at fraud or abuse or user experience, they talk about a single transaction or a dollar amount or what item they're purchasing, but there's so much more data there, even if they're not registering an account. Most companies these days, whether you're a big airline or hotel chain, you have an app, which means you essentially control a walled garden. Everything in there from how a user logs in, what device they're coming from, what operating system they're using. Hell, the United Airlines app, they collect or have access to contact lists, calendar, camera. There's so many things that these apps look at, and I, as a user of that app, willingly give it up in terms of being able to check out with my phone or whatever. And so all that data is passively given to United Airlines, and how are they using that data is the next step. It's not just about that one trip that they're booking at a particular time. It's understanding the whole behavior that brought the user to this specific scenario. So after you have all that data, hopefully it's digestible. And digestible, what I mean by that is not in a silo. And so often companies collect a ton of data, but it's messy or it's not in a good shape, so it's difficult to data mine. So if possible, digestible is key. What do you do with that? Essentially, you build machine learning models on top of it. You start to discover all the unknown unknowns out there that can be used to anticipate user behavior and patterns and really surface that, whether it's to a better user experience or to stop fraudy transactions from happening on your platform. So let's take an example. So let's say Sue over here. She's one of your most loyal customers. She's logging into your account. And the number or the score up here corresponds to probability of fraud. So the higher the number, the higher probability of fraud there is. The lower the number, the more legit she is. And so let's say she logs into her account, pretty ho-hum, and she wants to redeem a gift card. Let's say it's for $10. There's a dollar amount associated with it, so maybe the risk score goes up a bit. But for those particular cases, because she's coming from a known IP or device, or you know that she's been on the program or on the platform for a while, you should be enabling one-click checkout here. So this is what we're talking about, the term, you might have heard it around dynamic friction. So really 99% of the users out there, they're legit. They just want to buy something from you. They want to transact on your platform. And it's our job or the company's job to do whatever we can to make that transaction happen as quickly and as easily as possible. So for her, in this scenario, let's enable one-click checkout so she can get her redemption, and off she goes. Then let's say some time passes, like maybe she does some other activity on the site, like browsing some flights or some hotel rooms. Maybe at some point she suddenly changes her email address. Now that particular kind of behavior might be a bit more risky, but it's not in the red zone yet, but it's something to take notice of. Now what if, I don't know, a minute later, 2 minutes later, she now wants to redeem another type of gift card, but now it's for $100. Maybe at this point, you would send some sort of verification email, or you'd block that transaction altogether. But things like machine learning models can actually parse this out to understand in real time what is the probability of fraud, and then what is the next step. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure story, if you ever read those when you were a kid, where the story is dynamic, and it changes based on your preference as a user and how shady you look or how trusted you look as a user going through the purchase pattern. So after you have some machine learning models and you have the data to kind of model off of, you create some rules and some workflow. So often in my space, folks talk about, is it better to have machine learning models or a bunch of rules? And really, from a layered approach, you need both. It's not about it's not about rules only or machine learning only. Like, you'll need both to actually succeed in terms of creating a really good user experience plus keeping fraud at bay. And for example, if you're a US-based company, you don't need a machine learning model to tell you that you can't do business with North Korea or Iran. Like, you just can build a rule to say, hey, stop all these types of transactions, and there you go. Next up, you create analyst tools and enable feedback, where so many companies that I work with, when I ask them, like, hey, when you do fraud reviews or things like that, how often do these investigations take? And what percentage of the time is spent simply collecting data versus investigating and analyzing that data versus actually making a decision? And well over 50% of the time, people are just spending their time collecting data. And so they're just literally logging into 5 or 6 different tools, compiling all this data, and then finally making a decision. Really try to build, and the best tools I've seen in kind of my work have been around building tools that are super duper efficient for your analysts so they can spend less time compiling data and more time using their brain, frankly, and just making decisions from there. And finally, the last piece is just around reporting. And so the KPIs, monitoring what KPIs are important to your business, and then using that as the feedback mechanism to kind of run the rest of your business. And so many companies I talk with, they don't know what direction they're headed. They see things like machine learning or rules and device fingerprinting, and they're like, yeah, let's get it. But they don't necessarily have a good sense of where they should be at and kind of what are the straight up KPIs that they should be monitoring against to kind of move the needle along and create that better user experience. So finally, kind of the general takeaways, an erosion of trust can happen on many different levels. Most of us here are concerned about commerce and kind of money flowing through the system. Sure, that's one way. But if you take other areas like Facebook, for example, they don't necessarily have any money flowing through the system. They do in terms of you can send money to your friends, but the hot water that they're in right now is not about financial stuff. It's about data and breaching user trust in that regard. Next up, look for your companies. Look for ways that you can turn trust into a competitive advantage. The world of that draconian, slow sign-up process or purchase process is quickly changing. And from I forget what Brandon said earlier in the talk, where 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the companies that win are reducing friction and throwing that out the window. So the 99+% of users that are using our platform can go to exactly where they want to go, and they'll have a very set kind of menu or selection to pick from. So they're not inundated with too many choices, but they have a very customized kind of menu or meal to kind of go after, and then they'll convert relatively easily after that. You do that by considering the whole customer journey. And so it's not just about that single transaction. It's understanding that I, as a user, if I'm booking something on Airbnb, that maybe it takes me a few times to look at a particular flat or villa, and then maybe on that third time I will finally convert, and then putting things in place to know that, okay, Kevin's actually serious about this villa now, like let's incentivize him a little bit more or push him a little bit more to kind of finally convert. And really, the kind of last slide I kind of showed up there, what it was around having a layered approach when it comes to one, user experience, and two, fraud. You need to have that layered approach, and there's no one silver bullet that will kind of solve it all, but having multiple layers in there will help you, one, understand your customers more, so you can really kind of delineate between, hey, these are my amazing customers that I want to offer this one-click checkout to, and here are the, frankly, shadier customers that I want to keep at bay. And that's all I had. So happy to take any questions, or we have a booth outside, and happy to take questions there too.
So the question I'm not going to ask is how relieved are you that you are not at Facebook anymore? But
I'm still I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Facebook.
Well, this week.
I feel for the team, my old team that's kind of dealing with all this misinformation stuff right now. There's a whole bunch of stuff swirling, and Zuck is going to give a testimony tomorrow, I believe. But my 2 cents on it would be Facebook, people want to see those puppy videos. They want to see those cat videos, and they're willing to take the surveys, click on the links to get that instant gratification. Now, what I think where Facebook screwed up royally is that they had policies in place to stop to stop this kind of bad developer behavior and kind of what data they're actually taking on from their users. Where I think they fell short was around enforcement. And so really, it's one thing to have a policy, it's another thing to enforce on that policy. And I think Facebook effed up in terms of not understanding what developers were using with that data, and frankly, trusting that those developers were treating that data with integrity and not doing weird things with it.
So to leave it on a positive note, if you were to start benchmarking throughout the industry, who does it best, or who are the best in practice?
When it comes to the best kind of data stewards out there, I'm going to be a little bit biased. I used to work for Google as well, but there's a few companies that I have thrown up my hands and said, I will give you all my data, basically. Amazon being one, Google being the other. I inherently trust, based on the founders and the leaders and the data protection folks, at least when I talk to the security folks at these companies, they are paranoid when it comes to data privacy and security. And so those are the companies I trust right now. That's unfortunately about it. I mean, stuff came out recently from like Under Armour about a hack, even though there is from some vendor, Sears, Saks Fifth Avenue. I mean, Yahoo, Equifax, like the list goes on, unfortunately. And we're in a very tough scenario where I'd say from a password and personal information standpoint, our data is already floating out there. It doesn't matter how strong your password is, how good your password hygiene is, your data is already out there in some way, shape, or form. And so now that puts a lot of pressure on companies who want to provide a great user experience and kind of give you exactly where you want to go and kind of punch the cash register. It puts them in a tough spot because they want to have that frictionless experience, but at the same time, they're not quite sure who to trust.
Yeah, it's certainly a dichotomy of, I want to be able to check out quickly, and I'm becoming increasingly more paranoid about who knows. So yes, it's nice, but what is the border between nice and, too much, or nice and creepy, or nice and,
Overreaching, yeah. I'd say Facebook is right now is in, for example, just a no-win scenario. When I was there, we would take down stuff for being spam or scam, like just fake news crap. The thing is, when we did that was in the effort or in the intent of trying to keep the platform safe and secure. On the flip side, we would have other folks say like, hey, Facebook, you are basically, you are Big Brother. You are censoring what I'm trying to say, regardless if it's fake or real, whatever. So on one side, it's how could you let this happen on your platform? The other side is how could you take this down from your platform? You're obstructing my First Amendment rights. Who the F are you? And like, I should be able to say what I want to say.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.